the IFP are crushing MK and ANC in KZN, whereas the DA have suffered a major setback despite a Johannesburg victory. Here's what happened in the latest round of by-elections. So there were three contests which happened in the latest round of by-elections. In KZN, there was a heated battle between the incumbents, the NFP, against the IFP, the ANC, and the MK parties. In Johannesburg, the DA were looking to hold on to one of their strongholds, whereas in Polokwane, there was a battle between the ANC and the EFF. But before we get into this round of by-elections, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? It's completely free to do, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below the video. If you would like to support the channel and enjoy some additional perks, consider becoming a Power Club member. You can do so by clicking on the join button below. Now let's get started. So what was probably the most interesting by-election of the evening was this one that happened in Ward 17 in Nongoma, which is in KZN. So Nongoma is in the north of KZN, and although it is in a typical sort of IFP stronghold, it's actually the NFP which was holding on to this ward from the 2021 local elections. And so they were hoping to pull off an unlikely victory. But what we actually saw was the IFP continue their great momentum since the start of this year. They actually won the ward pretty convincingly, and they got 1,349 votes, or 58.65%. Trailing quite far behind was the MK party with 357 votes, or 15.52%, and then the NFP slipped all the way down to third. They only got 278 votes, or 12.09%. As for the ANC, they've continued to decline here as well at just 197 votes, or 8.57%, and the IFP really swept all of the voting districts, winning them all convincingly. While this was of course an impressive victory for the IFP, what makes it even more so is the fact that this is pretty much their highest result they've ever gotten in this ward, despite it being a by-election where you expect fewer voters than national and provincial elections. So if we look at 2016, the IFP were pretty strong here, and they'd won 48.7% of the votes, or 1,257 votes. We then saw how the IFP sort of dropped off the map, and this was due to the establishment of the NFP. Important reminder, the NFP is actually a breakaway party that splintered off the IFP, so it makes sense that as the NFP grew, the IFP lost votes. And so in that same election, we saw the NFP come up with 770 votes, or 31.7% of the vote. And so they came very close to defeating the IFP, who held on with just 33.8%, or 821 votes. In 2021, that's when we saw the NFP actually win the seat off the IFP. They got 1,020 votes, or 47%, and the IFP only had 736 votes, or 33.9%. And then in 2024, the IFP did bounce back. They got 953 votes, which was their highest result since 2016, whereas the NFP fell all the way down to 378 votes. And so it was already looking likely that the scales were being tipped in the IFP's favor. And then, of course, in this by-election, the IFP got their highest ever result. So a very impressive win for the IFP. If we look at the ANC, they've been on a consistent decline in this ward. If we take a look at the graph on the right-hand side, it's shown pretty visually that they've declined in every single election. And so there's no surprise here that they suffered a pretty dismal result. As for the MK party, they actually crushed both the NFP and the ANC in the 2024 election. They came up in a close second with 27.4% of the vote, or 620 votes. But in this by-election, they almost halved their votes. They only got 357 votes, or 15.52%. And so what we've seen in this by-election is actually similar to the previous KZN by-election in 2026, which is whereby the MK party almost capitulated, whereas they'd done pretty well in 2024, whereas the IFP have continued growing from strength to strength. Now, unlike that specific by-election, this is a historic IFP ward, and so it makes sense that the IFP are regaining their numbers, regaining their confidence, but ultimately it's a very impressive showing from them. They've managed to beat back the NFP, who were a direct threat to their voter base. The NFP seem to be becoming increasingly irrelevant, and obviously the MK party are continuing their decline from 2024. And so all of a sudden, KZN is looking very good for the IFP heading into the local elections later this year. Moving on to Ward 102 in Johannesburg. So this ward is a DA stronghold, and so it makes absolute sense that the DA were able to hold onto this ward. They got 3,464 votes, or 94.8% of the vote, and so a very clear, decisive victory for the DA. Up next was the ANC, who only got 119 votes, or 3.26%. And so upon first glance, it seems like a very obvious result, no need to analyze further. However, this result will actually be concerning for the DA for a surprising reason, and that can be shown through past election data. So as you can see from the election graph on the right-hand side, while no party has ever managed to meaningfully threaten the DA in this ward, the DA's vote share has continued to tank, especially after this by-election. You see, back in 2016, they had over 10,000 votes, or 83.4% in this ward. In 2019, they slipped to 9,694 votes, or 71.3%, and then they slipped ever further in 2021. They still held on at about 71.2% because it was a low voter turnout. But again, this is down to 6,968 votes. They did manage to recover somewhat in 2024. The higher voter turnout for them definitely helped. It was 8,683 votes, or 61%. And then although they won 94.8%, which is their highest ever percentage, they got their lowest ever vote tally of 3,464. So more than halving what they got in 2024. Now, if we look at the other parties, there are a couple of confusing data points here. So the ANC, for example, got 1,305 votes in 2016. It then went up to 2,398 in 2019. Not a surprise, because general elections have a higher voter turnout than municipals on average. They then fell all the way down to 659 in 2021, before climbing back up to 1,162 in 2024, or 8.2%. That's a bit of a strange result, and it's also pretty strange if we take a look at the EFF, because it was the same year where the EFF also grew. You see, they had 478 votes in 2016, then up to 890 in 2019, then all the way down to 370 in 2021, and then all the way up to 1,554 in 2024. Now, this obviously confused me greatly. How on earth is it that the ANC and EFF spiked in one election? And I double-checked the figures to see that they are correct, because I honestly thought there was a mistake. And the simplest conclusion I can come to is that somehow there's an informal settlement somewhere that's been set up, and those people are coming in and voting. Because after all, a lot of people will say, oh, maybe people were bussed in. But when it comes to local elections, you have to vote in your specific ward, and you have to have proof of address, proof of residency. And so the only way that I see an ANC and EFF spike is by something like that happening, where you've got informal settlements around. After all, if you take a look at the ordinary suburban people of pretty much any race, they do not vote for those kinds of parties. It really is that simple. Action SA were quite a threat in 2021. They got 1,244 votes, and they were the second place party in this ward with 12.7%. But again, nowhere near what the DA got. And the fact that they never contested this by-election will make one wonder, well, why is it that the DA not only lost their existing voters, but weren't able to attract other voters? Because after all, a lot of Action SA voters are former DA voters, and a lot of them are angry with Action SA because of the sort of strategic shift that they've taken, especially after the 2024 election. And so I know what most people are thinking, right? they're probably thinking, well, the DA lost for a simple reason. By-elections generally don't have as big a turnout as general elections and even municipal elections. But as we saw in our previous by-election, as well as others that the DA have participated in, this isn't often the case. In actual fact, in recent times, the by-elections have had higher turnouts than what by-elections used to get years ago. And so this really isn't an excuse. The other piece of rationale that could be true is that maybe a lot of voters decided not to show up. They said, well, this is a surefire DA ward. We know that the DA is going to win. There's nobody else who ever seems to contest. I've got work. I don't have a lot of free time. And so I didn't go vote. And that's also a possible option. But still, even if there are those kinds of people, to have less than half the votes you had in 2024 is a concern. And so I think the DA really needs to look into this. The final by-election was in Polokwane, specifically Ward 34. Now, this is an ANC stronghold. It does have a pretty big EFF presence. And basically, Limpopo and Polokwane, and specifically this area, is pretty much a socialist communist paradise. Those are the kinds of parties that the people support over there. So it makes complete sense that the ANC won this outright with 2,394 votes, or 72.02%. This was a slight drop from their previous result, and the EFF came up second with 685 votes, or 20.61%, and they actually grew a little bit. But although there really isn't much to analyze here, this is sort of an unsurprising result. The one piece of analysis that is worth mentioning is that the ANC did see a much lower turnout than they normally do, as is the case with most by-elections, and that's why the EFF managed to get quite a boost in percentage and the ANC declined. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this round of by-elections. So as we can see, a very good night for the IFP. They seem to really be dominating in KZN, and it will be a very interesting province to watch, because for those of you who remember, back in 2025, the Western Cape was sort of the province to watch because of all the by-elections there and how the PA and the DA were at odds with each other. This year, however, there are a lot more KZN wards up for contest, and so we're going to see a lot of these clashes between the IFP, the MK, and the ANC. So it will be really interesting to see whether or not the IFP can continue their momentum and perhaps even dominate KZN in the next election. Thanks very much for tuning in to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.